Hello, dear viewers. I am a global nationalist. I support nationalism in my country, India, and in all countries around the globe. Today is the first Sunday of the month, and so I will be talking about NATO. And today I want to talk about the latest diplomatic crisis between NATO and Russia and how it will impact relations between NATO and Russia overall. Now, first, I'll talk about immediately what's happened. Uh, NATO in early October expelled 8 diplomats from the Russian office, from 8 diplomats from NATO's office in Brussels uh, on accusations that they were suspected of spying for the Russian government. And 2 weeks later, the Russian government closed the NATO office in Moscow, the NATO information office in Moscow, which is the equivalent of an embassy, and also removed all its diplomatic staff from the NATO office in Brussels. Now, before I go further into this particular issue, I want to give a background on NATO's relationship with Russia. And yeah, so NATO was created originally to confront the Soviet Union in the Cold War. This was to prevent the communists from expanding their influence in the rest of Europe and to protect democracy and capitalism. Now, this was a necessary goal that those countries needed protection from the Soviets, and I support this movement. However, what later happened is that after the Cold War, when the USSR broke up, NATO did should have also broken up, in my opinion, or if not broken up, then they should have reorganized their mission into simply providing general protection and not simply being an outfit to uh, oppose Russia. But unfortunately, what happened was that NATO continued to accept requests from other European countries, which were closer to Russia's borders, and so this expanded NATO. This caused Russia to feel unsafe with regards to NATO and caused uh, Russia under President Putin to develop its military more, to become more aggressive vis-a-vis NATO. Now, I then what happened was that then, however, in the 1990s, the late 90s, and the early 2000s, there were several attempts by NATO to start new positive relations with Russia, such as the in 1997 there was um, excuse me, the documents that found laid the foundations for NATO's relationship with Russia post the Cold War are one, in 1997, the basic document of the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Program. Sorry, you can't see that. Um, Two, the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, and three, the 2002 Rome Declaration. The basic document of the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council established the NATO-Russia Council, which still exists today and is the council responsible for providing a diplomatic space for Russian and NATO diplomats to discuss and with each other and to communicate their concerns. And then in 1997, the NATO Russia Founding Act l- gave the basic foundations of their relationship, which includes several positions. There are mainly four sections that were the most important parts of this founding agreement. Section 1 states that all the that all disputes will be settled peacefully, that they will respect the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all states, and all the norms of international conduct prescribed in the United Nations Charter and the OSCE Helsinki Final Act will be followed. Section 2 creates a new forum called the NATO Russia Permanent Joint Council, for, which describe and in this section it describes how the council will function, which is what I've already discussed. That it simply provides a forum for Russian and NATO diplomats to converse with each other. Section 3 describes a range of issues that NATO and Russia will discuss, include conflict prevention, peacekeeping, prevention of the proliferations of weapons of mass destruction, and exchange of information on security policies and defense forces. Section 4 describes the military dimensions of the relationship. Among the key provisions are that um, NATO will NATO reiterates its current defense policy and strategy, that NATO will require adequate infrastructure on new members' territories, that NATO and Russia will commit to work for the prompt adaptation of the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty to reflect the changed security environment. And basically, Section 4 provides mechanisms to foster closer military to military cooperation between NATO and Russian militaries. Now, however, this positive growth in the relationship ended in the year 2014 when Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. Now, to a bit of the for those unfamiliar, the basic understanding that I have of the Ukraine Russia conflict is that in 2013, uh, the in elections in Ukrainian elections, the president who was elected was friendly towards Moscow, and this was a democratic election. And as far as I know, that there has never been any confirmed Russian interference, although there might have been. And all then in 2014, no, in 2030, that same year, there was a revolution called a Orange Revolution, in which people in Ukraine removed the president from power and installed uh, a NATO-backed president. And that this revolution has been confirmed to have been supported by NATO and the West. And this new president supported the West and was anti-Russia, and passed several laws that were discriminatory towards the Russian population, the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, which mainly live in Crimea, and and to counter this, Russia invaded the Crimean Peninsula and held a referendum whereby 90% of the Crimean population who voted to join Russia as a province of Russia. Ukraine completely rejected this referendum, and so did the United Nations, and uh, this caused European countries like Germany and France and America to pass sanctions against Russia, against Russian officials and companies that were supportive of the Russian government. These are economic sanctions that were meant to damage Russia's economy. This was done so that because this was coordinated by NATO. NATO implemented these measures against Russia because they believe that if by implementing these sanctions, they can pressurize Russia to come back to the negotiating table and to remove their troops from Crimea and to give it back to the Ukraine. However, that has not happened. There has been continuous conflict as Ukraine continues to uh, not accept Russia's sovereignty over Crimea. However, it must be mentioned that Ukraine is not a NATO member, neither is it a member of the EU, and therefore NATO cannot invoke Article 5 to protect Ukraine. And yeah, since the dispute or conflict between Ukraine and Russia, specifically Russia's annexation of Crimea, relations between NATO and Russia have gone down. And this latest diplomatic crisis, whereby uh, diplomats from both sides have been expelled from their countries, has is simply the latest chapter in NATO Russia's downward spiral of relations. And I want to talk about what impact I think this will have. I think that this is going to have a bad impact on NATO and Russia, but mainly on NATO. I think NATO is simply uh, being too aggressive with Russia. They are not paying heed to Russia's demands and concerns. And however, it is also necessary that they protect their member states from any actual aggression by Russia. And I do understand that Russia is a potential threat because it's such a big country, and the European countries that border Russia do fear it, do have concerns towards it, and NATO should work with those countries to prevent Russia from attacking them or invading them. And therefore, I think, however, with Ukraine, I'm not able to understand why neither the EU or NATO have made Ukraine a part of them. At least NATO should. And I think if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, then that will remove any ambiguity from NATO's position, and it will force Russia to, at, if not give back Crimea, to at least follow the ceasefire that was established in the Minsk agreement passed in the mid 2010s between France, Germany, and Russia, and Ukraine, and the US. Now, unfortunately, though, this crisis has caused thousands of lives to be lost and has damaged Ukraine's economy. And so, and I do think that while I can agree with the moral reasons of Russia protecting the indigenous, not indigenous, the ethnic Russian population of Ukraine, they were still Ukrainian citizens, and therefore Russia does not have any sovereignty or writ over them. Therefore, legally, I think that they should not have uh, tried to annex Crimea. That, however, because the Ukrainian president that was installed by NATO in was anti-Russia, they should have directly made attempts to made with that president to uh, get him into some kind of agreement, if not a treaty, to permanently establish friendly relations with Russia so that he doesn't antagonize them. And I think also they should have done, if that was not possible, which I don't think it was, then they should have at least built up their border defenses within Russia proper. And I don't think that they should have annexed Crimea. Uh, Although, however, now that it has happened, and it's been 7 years since, and there is no massive movement in Crimea against Russia. Most Crimeans do support the integration with Russia, or rather the reunification, as Crimea was once part of the Russian Empire. I think that NATO must come to some compromise, and so does Russia. I think that NATO's main goal right now should prevent be to prevent Russia from committing any further inroads into Ukraine. Therefore, they should bring Ukraine into their membership, and also NATO should, if they truly believe that these diplomats were spies. Right now, they've only claimed that they were suspected of activities that were harmful to NATO's interests, and they haven't confirmed that these were spies. Then they should come out with proof and prosecute. And rather than expelling them, they should have prosecuted these diplomats in the respect in Belgium, the Belgium judiciary, and other countries where these diplomats have allegedly committed offenses in NATO countries. So, what I think should happen is that NATO should promise Russia that it will not seek to expand its uh, number of members, except with the exception of Ukraine, that it will get Ukraine to accede, and Russia, and if Russia does not tries to prevent that, then I don't think they can, because it is a matter between NATO and Ukraine, and Russia should not interfere in that. And I think NATO will have to pressurize Russia to allow that to happen. However, as for Crimea, I think NATO should um, bring like NATO countries, particularly the ones in the UNSC, China, US, Britain, and France, should bring a resolution in the UN Assembly, General Assembly, stating that the UN should establish control over Crimea, have and the UN should uh, allow a distribution of powers between uh, the governments of Ukraine and Russia in Crimea, and should also hold a referendum in Crimea under the UN auspices, asking the Crimean people whether they want to be an independent country, remain a part of Russia, or go back to becoming a part of Ukraine. I think that this would be the optimal solution considering the circumstances, and I hope if this one isn't followed, then another peaceful solution is found between NATO and Russia. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for watching. Vande Mataram. If you want to see my other videos in this playlist, click here. If you want to see my previous video, click here.